Unitarian Universalism is firmly grounded in democratic ideals of the Enlightenment era, the same ideals on which this nation was founded. Though the fifth principle of Unitarian Universalism, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and the society at large, though that is the only one of our principles that mentions the democratic process, all of our principles can be understood as undergirding the principles of democracy. The basic assumptions of democracy are that every person matters, that equity and justice are essential, and the search for truth and is a requirement in that pursuit. Democracy assumes differences are accepted, and the peace, liberty, and justice we seek to have in our lives is a basic human desire. And democracy is based on the fact that though we are each unique individuals, our lives are intertwined in a marvelous web that binds each to the whole. Democratic ideals and Unitarian Universalist principles, they go hand in hand, which is why our tradition has been so heavily involved in all the major civil rights issues of the past few centuries, and it continues still today. Social justice is our spiritual and institutional DNA. Our commitment to the inherent worth and dignity of all people and the interdependent web demands nothing less. How can we not take to the streets when people are preaching hate? This does not mean, however, that Unitarian Universalists are always in agreement on a means of achieving social justice. The right of conscience and the use of the democratic process means we do not have to agree on all things, but rather it marks a respect for our differences and provides the space for each of us to pursue justice accordingly. But with all this talk about principles, which are up here, up in this stratosphere, all these talk about principles, which can be rather esoteric if we are not careful, it is important to remember the words of Alan Watts, noted philosopher and scholar of religion, who says, like love, the light or guidance of truth that influences us exists only in living form, not in principles or rules or expectations or advice, however widely circulated. In other words, our principles, no matter how eloquent or grand, no matter how thoughtfully they happen to be or emotionally bound we are to them, life and love override them all. Period. If a principle or belief runs counter to life or love, then it is nullified. When I was 16, I was preparing to take my written test for my driver's license. I was given some really good advice. It was pointed out to me that in every section of the driver's manual that we were studying, there was always an exception to the rule. Always. I was told that if that exception appears on the test, it is most likely the correct answer. And what is that exception? Safety. What's the maximum speed limit? 55 at the time. Unless conditions are not safe. So safety overrides all other rules. Passing is allowed unless it's not safe. Just because we have a passing lane, does that mean we can pass? Well, only if it's safe. Safety overrides all other traffic laws, period. just as love and life override all laws, all principles, all philosophies, all theologies, and every single ism that has ever or will ever exist. Period. If that is not the case, then there is no meaning to our principle of the inherent worth and dignity of all people, or all beings. If love doesn't take precedence over all rules, all laws, all things, then what does it mean to say the inherent worth and dignity of all beings? It is with concern for the inherent worth and dignity of all people and all beings and all life, with concern for the interdependent web of all existence, and by right of conscience and commitment to democratic principles, that I will address a question that Henry David Thoreau asks of us. He says, "Is a democracy, such as we know it, the last improvement possible in government? Is it not possible to take a step further towards recognizing and organizing the rights of people, of life?" He says, man. There will never be a really free and enlightened state until the state comes to recognize the individual as a higher and independent power from which all its own power and authority are derived, and treats him accordingly. Now, putting aside the gender-biased language here, not to mention the human-centric bias to this whole discussion, let's consider the greatest limits to our current governmental system and economic system, because, let's be honest, we can't separate those two. In essence, those limits can be summed up in a single statement: freedom without responsibility. As a society, we want guns without reasonable safeguards. As a society, we want our cheap electronics and clothing without consideration of impact on human lives who make them and on the environment from which the raw materials are drawn. We want easily accessible and affordable energy without regards to the environmental impact. We want the freedom to eat anything we want and not be responsible for our own health, the welfare of others, or that of our planet. Our corporations want profit without responsibility of taking care of their employees or the environment from which they draw the raw materials. Our politicians want wealth and power that their corporate sponsors provide without any accountability to we the people. And we, the people, want a government that gives us what we want without having to pay for it. This isn't to say that there aren't any responsible individuals, corporations, politicians that do not fit this description. There are always exceptions. But collectively speaking, looking at it from the outside, it's hard to deny the facts. Americans want all their freedoms, but none of the responsibilities that come with them. And it will only be by working collectively that we can ever hope to turn things around. In this case, as in most cases, there is no Savior, there's no Messiah, except for us. We cannot hope for any politician to save us. The system is so corrupt that even the best intended cannot help but succumb. Neither can we buy our way out of the environmental and economic problems that face the world today. Yet I have a hope. And it's the hope of anarchy. It's philosophical anarchy. The philosophy of anarchy lies in empowering people to take control of their own lives, not on having others having power over them. And I must say that this recognition did not come easily. I wanted to believe that we can salvage our current system. I really wanted to believe that. But I do not see significant evidence in support of that wish. While it is tempting to point fingers at political parties, large business, the Supreme Court, this president or that president, we can blame capitalism, we can blame consumerism, we can point fingers of blame all day long. But in the end, we are all part of the system, which means we must be part of the solution. And pointing fingers just serves to have us look the other way and deny our own responsibility. We are the ones who complain about high fuel costs and then act surprised when it turns out oil companies are cutting corners to save money and creating an oil spill. We are the ones who continually re-elect our representatives because they are the exception to the rule, even though Congress has an 11% approval rating and a 90% re-election rate. Roughly. I found this slide and double-checked it. The numbers are close enough for this to be considered by PolitiFact true. Think about that. Now, you might think, well, I don't vote for my representative, but, everybody out there is. And that we keep re-electing them even though we say, but collectively, as Americans, what are we doing? But ultimately, because of this, we are responsible for the mess at the top. So if we are responsible, then we must be the solution. So what comes to mind when you hear the word anarchy? Well, it's a good chance it's similar to mythosaurus. Lawlessness, nihilism, mobocracy, revolution, insurrection, disorder, chaos, mayhem, tumult, turmoil, all of which sounds like what we saw a few weeks ago in Virginia. And not one of those people were seeking to take down the government, quite the opposite. They want a government to enforce their will, and they are willing to fight for it. Think about that. They want a government to enforce their will over all people. Right now we have a government that excludes itself from the rule of law. It supports insurrection and creates mayhem and turmoil with drones and bombs all around the globe. Journalists are arrested for reporting about peaceful protests. People are so worked up about the Second Amendment to keep and bear arms that we are neglecting the First Amendment, about there being no law abridging the freedom of speech or the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress or grievance. Let me expand on that a bit. If you're white and want to bear arms and host a rally, then that is not only allowed but protected by police lines. But if you are an unarmed, nonviolent water protector or standing in defense of your own civil rights, peacefully, that is greeted with police lines turned against you. Now, I'm not trying to single out police as bad guys here, or the military, because ultimately they are us. They are our neighbors and friends. I have a godson who is a police officer, friends and family in the military, and I know firsthand that they are all good, caring people. They have families to support, a mortgage, bills to pay, which makes that decision to not follow orders very difficult. But do you know what would make it easier for them to resist, to not follow orders, to follow conscience, knowing that there was a movement behind them? Consider the word anarchy. That first part, an, simply means no. And archy represents a ruler, as in monarchy, rule by one, oligarchy, rule by a small group of people. Thus, anarchy simply means no ruler. So do you recognize the bias found in the thesaurus and in common usage of the term? It is assumed that if we lack a ruler, it means nothing but chaos and disorder. As it turns out, the framers of the Constitution, many of them anyway, they equated democracy, true democracy, with anarchy. The United States is a constitutional republic because the founders believed that democracy was equivalent to mob rule. They believed the common people needed a strong federal government to maintain order and promote the common good by force when necessary. That is the defining characteristics of all governments. They hold the monopoly on the use of force. And this is true of all governments, whether they be dictatorships or republics, capitalist or communist, religious or atheistic. The force used can come from the form of physical violence, imprisonment, fines, deportation, the loss in rights and privileges of citizenship, or the threat of any and all of these things. It can be explicit or implicit, direct or indirect. We are conditioned to believe that civilization would literally fall into chaos without government intervention, without a ruler. We are made to believe that without the threat of violence, the results would be catastrophic. Well, this is the same argument used against our spiritual ancestors, the Universalists. People could not imagine a religion without eternal damnation, without the fear of hell. They believed, I presume, that the only thing that keeps people from killing and stealing is the fear of hell. It's the same argument used against atheists. That if you don't fear God, then you'll just do whatever you want. We have been conditioned since birth to believe that governments are essential. Yet for the vast majority of human history, governments did not exist. It wasn't until well after we started living in large cities that the first monarchs wrested power away from the people. About the same time, gross inequality became more prevalent and sustained wars of conquest emerged. This isn't to say that war and inequality didn't exist before civilization, because they did. However, the scale of inequality and the scale of war were considerably less. The only way gross inequality and conscription can be sustained is by threat of force. Now, I'm not saying, again, civilization was all bad. It did and does have its redeeming qualities. But must we assume that the model for running society that was established over 5,000 years ago is the best possible model for all time? In his book, The Kingdom of God is Within You, Christian anarchist and philosopher Leo Tolstoy wrote, "We are guided in economical, political, and international questions by the principles which were appropriate to men of 3,000 or 5,000 years ago, though they are directly opposed to our conscience and the conditions of life which we are placed today." The barbarians at the gate are gone. The gods in the heavens casting lightning bolts at us have been conquered. We have been to the moon and beyond. We understand now that we are not the center of the universe. Why do we still organize ourselves in this archaic fashion? Philosophical anarchy does not argue for the immediate and complete dismantling of all government. and it especially does not promote a violent revolution to bring about the downfall of government. That would make philosophical anarchy no different than what we have now. I feel anarchy is the hope of the future because it's organized horizontally. When governments as we know them came into being, the world was organized hierarchically. In the classic chain of being with God at the top. God ruled over all creation, followed by angels, then man, all the way down to the animal kingdom. And so monarchs rule over the land and all of its inhabitants, and men ruled over their households, and humans ruled over the animals. It's all hierarchical. That is the way it's been. That is how civilization has been organized since the beginning. It was believed to be the natural order of things. Still is by many. But we know that's not how the universe is organized. Just the fact that some people believe that a ruler, whether it's a king or an elected president, serves by divine right should be sufficient for us to question the necessity of such a system. That is the case right now in this country. People believe that our president serves by divine right and so cannot do wrong. If that doesn't scare the hell out of you, I don't know what does. When Unitarian Universalists cast off traditional theology, we accepted responsibility for our own spiritual salvation. And as we cast off traditional ideas of government and compulsory citizenship, we will likewise be forced to take responsibility for our collective salvation. As it stands today, too many people would rather pay taxes than to reach out and help the poor and homeless and ill people of society. Which wouldn't be horrible if it actually worked, if our taxes went to actually helping those people, but over half of all tax revenue is spent supporting the military-industrial complex. So if I could just pay taxes to help the poor and the needy, I'd be glad to do it. But because we're willing to pay somebody else to do it, we forfeit our responsibilities to our neighbors. And I can't help but feel we forfeit, in doing so, a large chunk of our freedoms as well. Are we ready, as a people, are we ready for anarchy? Absolutely not. No way. Because there's no way to prepare to live in a fully anarchistic society, because we don't live in an anarchist society. It's a catch-22. It's a matter of conditioning. It's a matter of growing up with the idea that our freedoms come with responsibility. But as the 2016 Nobel laureate in literature, Bob Dylan, sang, I'm going to change my way of thinking, make myself a different set of rules. I'm going to put my good foot forward and stop being influenced by fools. That good foot forward then is to develop anarchistic subcultures. The Occupy movement was built on anarchistic values and practices, which is why the government came down so hard on it. Because they didn't have a particular leader that they could take down. They didn't know initially how to react. It's like, who do we attack? Who do we belittle in the media if there's no leader to attack? And so they didn't know what to do, and they finally just had to say, use some archaic sanitary laws to shut down Occupy. It was scary to the government. a successful anarchistic movement. When I saw the water protectors in North Dakota, they were very anarchistic. People responding to the call of their conscience to create a better world for ourselves and our descendants. It wasn't a political movement, it's a people movement. Decisions were made in councils, and people followed their conscience and followed the decision in the council, or if they chose to back away, they did. No one was forced to do anything they didn't want to do. But people were risking their lives for everything. What is happening now in America? The hatred, the divisiveness. It did not happen overnight, and no one politician or one party is to blame. It's the product of years and years of apathy and neglect on the part of the American people. We have shirked our collective responsibilities to manage our government. We have given up our collective free will for the sake of security and convenience. We want what we want, and we want it now. Henry David Thoreau, in his influential essay on the duty of civil disobedience, the essay that inspired both Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., wrote, "I heartily accept the motto that government is best which governs least, and I should like to see it acted up to move more rapidly and systematically. Carried out, it finally amounts to this, which also I believe, that government is best which governs not at all. And when men are prepared for it, that will be the kind of government which they will have." What is it that Thoreau imagined? Except anarchy. Radical democracy. Rule of the people, not rule over the people. What is it that John Lennon imagined other than anarchy? Radical democracy. Power to the people. We love that song. Did you realize it was anarchy? You may say I'm a dreamer, but clearly I am not the only one. So be it. Amen. Blessed be.